Last Saturday, I watched my husband walk into a coffee shop with another woman, pull out her chair, and sit across from her like they'd done it 100 times before. I stood on the sidewalk with a grocery bag in my hand and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And the worst part, he was smiling. Not the tired smile I'd been getting for the past 8 months. A real one. The kind I hadn't seen in so long I'd almost forgotten what it looked like. I took out my phone right there on the street and I did something I will never fully forgive myself for. I called my mom and told her everything. But before I tell you what happened next, I need to back up. Because to understand that morning, you have to understand the year that led up to it. My name is Tessa. I'm 32 years old and I've been married to my husband for 6 years. His name is Patrick. We met in college at Ohio State during our junior year. He was in line behind me at the campus bookstore, arguing with himself out loud about whether to buy a used textbook or just pilot a PDF. And I turned around and told him the used copy was worth it, because the previous owner had highlighted all the actually important parts. He laughed. I laughed. That was pretty much it. We got married young by most people's standards, 26 and 28. My grandmother pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner and said, "Honey, you sure about this one?" And I told her I had never been more sure of anything. She smiled and said, "Good, hold on to that feeling. You're going to need it on the hard days." I didn't really know what she meant back then. I do now. The hard days started about a year ago. Patrick's company went through a round of layoffs, and even though he kept his position, everything changed after that. The team that was left had to absorb the work of the people who were let go, which meant Patrick was suddenly working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. He'd leave before I woke up and come home after I'd already eaten dinner. Some nights I'd hear him come in, and by the time I went to the living room, he'd already fallen asleep on the couch with his laptop still open on his chest. I tried to be patient. I told myself this was temporary. I reminded myself that he was doing it for us, for the mortgage on our house in Columbus, for the vacation we talked about taking to Portugal, for the future we'd been building together since we were 26 years old, standing at an altar. But patient only gets you so far when you're essentially living alone in a house you share with someone. I started filling the silence with work. I'm a graphic designer, freelance, and I started taking on more clients than I could really handle. I told myself it was productive. I told myself I was being smart, building our savings during a tough stretch. But honestly, I think I just needed somewhere to put all the energy I no longer had an outlet for. Our Saturday morning walks, our Sunday dinners where we actually cooked together and drank cheap wine and talked about everything and nothing. Our stupid, pointless, wonderful habit of watching terrible reality TV together every Thursday night and making fun of it with the kind of specificity that can only come from years of shared language. All of it just quietly disappeared. Not with a fight, not with a conversation. It just faded, the way a sound does when you slowly turn the volume without realizing your hand is on the dial. By the time last fall rolled around, we were polite with each other. That's the only word I have for it, polite. Like two people who respect each other but have nothing left to say. He'd ask how my day was. I'd ask about his. We'd eat dinner mostly in silence and go to bed on opposite sides of a king-sized mattress and wake up and do it again. There was one night in November where I sat at my desk at 11 o'clock staring at a logo I was redesigning for a client. And I suddenly started crying. Not about the logo, just crying. That specific kind of cry where you don't even know where it's coming from until you sit with it long enough and then it hits you all at once. I missed my husband. I missed my husband. I missed him like you miss someone who's gone. Except he was asleep in the next room. That's a particular kind of loneliness I wouldn't wish on anyone. I thought about bringing it up. I rehearsed conversations in my head 100 times. But every time I imagined saying, "I feel like we're losing each other," I also imagined him looking at me with exhaustion in his eyes, and I couldn't do it. I didn't want to be one more thing he had to manage. So I didn't say anything. And the months kept going. That brings me to last Saturday. I had gone to the farmer's market on 5th Street, which is maybe 6 blocks from our house. I go almost every week for coffee and fresh bread and whatever looks good that morning. It's one of the things I do alone now, one of the small rituals I've built for myself to fill in the gaps. I was on my way back, grocery bag in one hand, coffee in the other, cutting through the side street near Hartwell Avenue. That's when I saw it. Patrick, my husband, walking into Birch and Brown's, this small, warm coffee shop on the corner that we used to go to together. He was holding the door open for a woman I had never seen before. She was probably around my age, dark hair, wearing a yellow coat. They were both laughing about something as they went inside. I stopped on the sidewalk. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself it was a collie, a work meeting, something totally normal that I was about to catastrophize because of how lonely the last 8 months had been. I told myself all of that, and then I watched through the window as he pulled out her chair before sitting down across from her, and something cracked open in my chest. He has never once in 6 years pulled out my chair at a coffee shop. Not because he's not thoughtful, he is in a lot of ways, but because that was never really our dynamic. We were equals in small moments. We pulled out our own chairs, so seeing him do it for someone else felt like a language I didn't recognize being spoken in my own home. I stood on that sidewalk for I don't know how long. 2 minutes. Maybe 5. Then I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, and I didn't even say hello. I just said, Mom, I'm standing outside a coffee shop and I'm watching Patrick sit down with another woman and I don't know what to do. There was a pause. Then my mom said very carefully, What do you mean, sitting down with another woman? And I described it. The held door, the pulled chair, the way they both laughed coming in, the smile on his face. My voice was steady until it wasn't, and then I was crying on a sidewalk on a Saturday morning in Columbus, Ohio, with a bag of sourdough and asparagus and a cold cup of coffee. And my mom was quiet on the other end for a moment. And then she said, Tessa, I'm coming. Mom, you don't have to. I'm already getting my keys. My mom lives 20 minutes away. She and my dad have been married for 39 years and she is not the kind of woman who lets her daughter cry on a sidewalk. She told me to go home and wait, that she'd be there soon. I walked the 6 blocks back to the house on autopilot. I sat down at the kitchen table and I stared at the farmer's market bag and I thought about all the Saturday mornings that had once felt so easy. She arrived in 18 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. She came through the front door, took one look at my face and didn't say anything for a moment. Just sat down across from me and put her hands over mine on the table. Tell me again, she said. So I did. All of it. Not just that morning, all of it. The long year, the silence at dinner, the feeling of missing someone who was in the same room. The way I'd stopped trying to reach out because I was afraid of being a burden. I talked for a long time and she listened without interrupting, which is the thing my mom does when she understands that what you need is not advice. Not yet. What you need is to be heard. When I finally stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. I know this feeling. I looked at her. The year your father got passed over for the promotion, she said. Do you remember that? You were about 11. He came home from work and I could see it all over his face, but he didn't want to talk about it. And then weeks went by and he stopped wanting to do anything on weekends. Stopped wanting to go to the park with you kids. Stopped wanting to come to your soccer games. I thought. She stopped. I thought something had changed. About us. I had no memory of this. I'd been 11 years old. The world had been soccer cleats and sleepovers. What happened? I asked. I got scared. She said simply. And instead of telling him I was scared, I got busy. I started volunteering at your school. I joined a book club. I started taking on extra hours at work. I thought I was handling it. But really I was just building walls. She looked at me. Your father noticed, and it hurt him. More than I understood at the time. I felt something shift inside me. She reached across and squeezed my hand. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I don't know what's happening here. But Tessa, the story you are telling me about the last 8 months, I need you to make sure you're not leaving out your own chapter. I opened my mouth to say something and then closed it again because I didn't know what to say. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, something was starting to work its way to the surface. My mom left about an hour later. She hugged me at the door and told me to call her no matter what. And I said I would. And I stood in the doorway and watched her back out of the driveway. Then I went back inside and sat down on the couch and I thought, really thought. I thought about the last 8 months from Patrick's side of the mattress. I thought about the times he'd come home and I'd already gone to my office to finish a project. The times he'd said, "Want to watch something?" And I'd said, "Maybe later, I have a deadline." The birthday dinner I'd planned for his 34th birthday that I'd moved from a Saturday to a Wednesday because a client needed revisions, and he'd said it was fine. It was totally fine. And I had believed him. I thought about how I'd started sleeping with my phone on my nightstand with the brightness up because I was always waiting on emails from clients in different time zones, and how the light kept Patrick awake, but I had asked him to just use an eye mask, and he had, without complaint. Because that's the kind of person he is. I thought about all of it and I felt sick, not because of the woman in the yellow coat, but because of who I had become without noticing. I heard the front door open around noon. Patrick came in with his gym bag home from his Saturday workout the same way he always was, by 12:30. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the couch in the same spot I'd clearly been for a while. "Hey," he said carefully, "you okay?" "I saw you this morning," I said, "at Birch and Grounds." He set his bat down slowly. "Okay. With a woman." He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Yeah, that was Devon. She's Marcus's wife. Marcus is Patrick's closest friend from college. They've been best friends since freshman year. I met Marcus a handful of times at our wedding, at a birthday party a few years ago. I have never once in 6 years met his wife. Not because of any drama or falling out, just because we'd always been, we should all get together sometime, and it had never actually happened the way those things sometimes don't. "Why were you having coffee with Marcus's wife?" I asked. Patrick sat down in the armchair across from me. He looked tired in a way that was different from the exhaustion I'd gotten used to. This was something else. "Because I asked her to meet me," he said. I stared at him. "I needed advice," he said, "from someone who knows what it's like to be on the other side of it." Devon grew up in a house where her mom worked all the time. She has a way of explaining things that I thought might, I don't know, help me figure out how to say what I needed to say. "What you needed to say to who?" He looked at me steadily. "To you, Tessa." The room was very quiet. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," he said. Not with anger, with sadness. And I don't mean that as an attack. I mean, I genuinely don't know how to reach you. I try, I'll come home and want to just sit with you for 20 minutes, no phones, just us, and you're always in the middle of something. And I know the work is important. I know we have a mortgage and bills and you're trying to help carry the load, especially after my company got scary last year. I know all of that. But Tessa? He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been sleeping next to you for 6 years and lately I feel like a stranger in our own house." I felt the words land the way he meant them to. Not like an accusation, like grief. "I didn't want to just come at you with 'I'm unhappy' out of nowhere," he continued, "because I knew you'd feel guilty and I didn't want that either. So I've been trying to figure out how to say it right. Devon's been helping me think it through," she said. He almost smiled. She said the mistake she always sees couples make is waiting too long to say the quiet thing out loud. I was crying by then, not the dramatic kind. Just the silent kind, where tears run down your face and you don't make a sound because you're too busy listening. I pulled out her chair. I said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "At the coffee shop. You held the door and you pulled out her chair and you were smiling, really smiling. And I couldn't remember the last time you'd smile like that with me." He looked at me for a long moment. "I was nervous," he said finally. "I've never met Devon before. I was trying to make a good impression because I wanted her to actually want to help me." He shook his head. "And the smile. Tessa, I smile. I smile at you. Not lately. No," he said quietly. "Not lately. Because lately everything feels careful and heavy and I don't know where to put myself in your life anymore." I didn't have an answer for that. Because he was right. I had been careful. I'd been so careful not to add to his stress that I'd stopped letting him into mine, and somewhere in the process of protecting him, I had simply stepped back, out of reach. "Your mom called me," he said. I went still. "What?" "About 45 minutes ago. She called my cell. He was watching my face. She didn't tell me what you said to her. She just said that you had seen something this morning and she was worried about you, and she asked me if there was anything I needed to tell you. He paused. She said sometimes it takes a scared person seeing something from the outside to finally have the conversation they should have had a long time ago. I thought about my mom at the kitchen table, her hands over mine, the story about my father and the promotion I hadn't known about, the walls she said she built. She set this up, I said slowly. Patrick shook his head. Not exactly. She just nudged it. The conversation was always going to have to happen. She just made sure it was today. I sat with that for a moment. My mom, 39 years of marriage, and she still remembered exactly what it felt like to be right here, in this room, having this conversation. I got up from the couch and I crossed the living room and I sat down on the arm of Patrick's chair, which is something I used to do all the time in the early years and hadn't done in I couldn't tell you how long. He looked up at me and something in his face opened up. I'm sorry, I said. I've been so scared of being a burden that I made myself invisible. He reached up and took my hand. I'm sorry too. I should have said something sooner instead of going looking for the right words somewhere else. Devon seems nice, I said. He laughed. A real laugh. She's great actually. She said she's been wanting to meet you for years because Marcus talks about us. We should all get together. We should, he said. We really should. We sat like that for a while, not talking about the mortgage or the clients or the schedule, just sitting, his hand in mine, the Saturday quiet around us, and outside the window the Columbus neighborhood we'd chosen together 6 years ago, doing its ordinary unhurried thing. Later that afternoon, we called my parents to have them over for dinner. My mom picked up and I could hear the particular careful silence on her end, the one that meant she was waiting to find out what kind of call this was. We're okay, I told her. More than okay. Can you and Dad come over tonight? She exhaled. I'll bring the wine. When they arrived that evening, my dad came through the door first and shook Patrick's hand with both of his, the way he does when he means something by it, and my mom came in behind him and hugged me in the kitchen, and I said into her shoulder, You called him? She pulled back and looked at me with that expression she's had my whole life, the one that means I know exactly what I'm doing. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Sometimes love needs a little help getting unstuck, she said. I laughed and shook my head. 39 years and you still play chess with people's feelings. 39 years, she said, is how you get good at it. We had dinner, Pastor Patrick made from scratch, which he hadn't done in months, and the wine my mom brought and my dad's long, winding story about a guy at his gym that none of us had ever met but all felt like we knew personally by the end, and Patrick and I sat next to each other at our own table the way we used to. Close enough that our arms touched, and it felt like something that had been held underwater, finally rising back up to the surface. I kept thinking about what my mom said at the kitchen table that morning. The story about my dad and the promotion, the walls she'd built, the things she hadn't understood until later. I thought about how the scariest part of that morning hadn't actually been the woman in the yellow coat. It had been the moment on the sidewalk when I'd realized I didn't know my own husband's schedule, didn't know who Devon was, didn't know that Marcus had been married for 4 years, didn't know that Patrick had been quietly trying to figure out how to reach me because I had made myself so self-contained that there was nowhere for him to reach. I'd been so worried about disappearing into someone else's life that I'd disappeared from my own marriage. That's the thing no one tells you about the slow fade. You're so focused on not being a burden that you don't notice you become a ghost. You're there, technically. You sleep in the same bed and eat at the same table and share the same login on the streaming services. But the small, soft, alive things that make a marriage, those need tending. They need the intentional, everyday nothing. The pulled chair, the terrible reality TV, the question asked not out of politeness but out of genuine wanting to know. A week later, Patrick and I went back to Birch and Grounds. We sat at a table by the window on a Saturday morning and I ordered the lavender latte. I'd been meaning to try for 2 years, and he ordered his usual black coffee and made a face at my lavender latte, the same way he's made a face at every fancy coffee I've ever ordered. And I laughed and said, "You literally have never tried it." And he said, "I don't need to try it, I can smell the betrayal of actual coffee from here." And I laughed again, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere easy and unguarded. He reached across the table and held my hand. Just like that, the way you do when you don't think about it. I thought about everything it had taken to get back to something that simple. The year of silence. The Saturday morning on the sidewalk. My mom at my kitchen table with her hands over mine. The conversation that finally got said out loud. And I thought, some things don't break all at once. They loosen slowly, one small missed moment at a time, until one morning you're standing on a sidewalk staring through a coffee shop window and everything comes loose at once. But that moment, that terrifying, cracked open, I cannot breathe moment, sometimes that's exactly what it takes. Not the end, just the turning point. The place where you finally stop turning the volume down and start finding your way back to the song. I keep thinking about the grocery bag. Sourdough, asparagus, a cold cup of coffee. The most ordinary Saturday morning errand in the world. And somehow it became the thing that cracked my marriage back open. That's the part that stays with me, not the drama of it. Not the woman in the yellow coat or the held door or the pulled chair. What stays with me is how close we came to just continuing. To another month of polite dinners and separate silences and sleeping on opposite sides of a bed that suddenly felt very wide. We were so close to just letting it keep fading. Patrick had been carrying something heavy for months. Not the thing I feared, but something real, something that takes a particular kind of courage to sit across from someone and say out loud, "I don't know how to reach you anymore." He could have gotten angry. He could have shut down further. Instead, he went and found someone who understood the shape of the problem, asked for help thinking it through, and kept trying to find the right words for the woman he married. That's not weakness. That's the kind of quiet integrity that doesn't make headlines, but holds a life together. And me. I have to be honest about me. I thought I was being selfless. I thought keeping my loneliness to myself, staying out of his way, not adding to his stress, I thought that was love. But there's a version of self-erasure that looks like consideration and is actually just fear. Fear of being too much. Fear of saying I miss you and having it land wrong. I told myself I was protecting him. I was protecting myself. Those are different things, and it took standing on a sidewalk in a panic to finally see which one I'd actually been doing. What my mom did that morning, calling Patrick saying just enough to unstick the moment, that came from 39 years of knowing what a marriage actually costs. Not the wedding day version of love, but the Tuesday in November version. The version where you choose each other again, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when the conversation is hard to start. She had been exactly where I was sitting. She knew the walls I was building because she had built them herself once. And she knew the only way through them was the same way through any hard thing. You face it, you say it, you stay. That's the part nobody talks about enough. The staying. Not the dramatic gesture or the grand apology, but the decision. Meet quietly, without an audience, to stop letting distance win. To put down your phone and pull out your partner's chair. To say the quiet thing out loud before it becomes the unsaid thing that hollows everything out. I didn't need to be smarter to fix what was broken between us. I needed to be braver. Brave enough to admit I was lonely. Brave enough to hear that I had made myself unreachable. Brave enough to sit in the armchair next to my husband and say I'm sorry, without immediately explaining it away. The lavender latte was good, by the way. Patrick still thinks it's a betrayal of coffee. Some things don't change, but we're back at the table together, and that's the only part that matters.